So I was talking exactly, yeah. So I was trying to sort of explain how we give a unique spin to this idea of community collaboration software. And the point I was making
Mm-hmm.
is that we've replaced this idea of a super admin of the community with an NFT, and this NFT lives on the blockchain, obviously, and you can put this NFT on a multisig, and then this multisig can define the moderators in that community.
Ah,
And so,
that's nice.
yeah, you have a collectively owned communication space that not a single person is responsible for or can shut down. So if
Right.
the founder of the community becomes obsolete at some point or inactive or turns against the community, or the community does things that are legally gray, then it's really advantageous because it's actually a collective of people, potentially thousands of people, who together own this space. You can't point at a single
Ah,
person that's responsible
yeah,
for it.
that's nice.
Yeah,
That's
right.
nice.
And so, yeah, and those are the kinds of features we're thinking about in order to actually make it true community software. That's the tech level. And on the legal level,
That's
we're
great.
doing the same. So Common Ground is basically owned by a cooperative. And our plan is that every user of the platform, every community becomes a co-owner of the cooperative, which makes them, legally speaking, the owners of the code, of the service, of the platform, of the data, and of all the revenues that we may create in the future through taking a commission on certain transactions that are happening on the platform. So we want to allow communities to start monetizing, so offer subscriptions, offer donations, those sorts of things. And the platform will take whatever 5%, something like this. And then these revenues actually belong to all the users of the platform. Yeah.
That's
So
great. I mean,
yeah.
are you guys already structured in the cooperative way, and that, because that's huge if you're already kind of over that hump.
We aren't over it yet. Right now we're a non-profit association. So we've
Okay.
already sort of locked us into this path by putting it in a non-ownable entity. So there is no
Mm-hmm.
equity that we could sell. It's really owned by the association. And the association is governed by token voting. So one token equals one vote. And then once we have our next financing round completed, which is currently unknown when that will happen, but once that happens, we're able to afford the incorporation of the cooperative. We're already in the legal works of it. We're preparing for it. We have experts on board who know how to do it. We know exactly what kind of cooperative to incorporate. We're working on the statutes already and the sort of business plan that it needs. And if things go well, by end of the year, we will start the incorporation process of the cooperative, and then sometime next year, Q1, something like this, the cooperative will be there. Oh, damn.
We're actually going through a similar ideation around, ownership structure as a network cooperative. So let's definitely avoid redundancy and see if we can, kind of converge on structures that work for broad, class of collaborations. So yeah, very interesting.
I love that. I think this is where we can really help because I think, more lawyers than developers in this team. Way too many lawyers. And not too many, but just a lot. And so we really sort of know what we're doing in the legal arena. Of course, we have this sort of European lens, but if that is something that would be interesting to you, I think we have a lot to share on how to do it. So I don't know where you stand in the process, but we're getting quite, like, we really know what we're doing in the legal domain, I would say.
I was just saying that I have access to the bylaws of this company, Memri.io, MEMRI.io, and they have structured it according to that higher company's model of kind of a network structure instead of a hierarchical structure. And I'm trying to. I'll find them, but it's actually done in European. It's European, so I think if you guys are
Mm,
European lawyers, I think you'll see a lot of familiar stuff there, and maybe it'll be
nice.
useful for you,
Yeah, wow, cool.
because they did a lot of work and spent a lot of time, getting it set up. So it could be something that, I mean, I've thought about using it as a model for what we're doing, and the main impediment to that, at least conceptually, was that it is European, and so maybe a little harder
Yeah,
for us to
yeah,
get, but you guys will get it easily, I'm sure.
nice.
So I'll find that and send it on to you. Let's see. I mean, I could talk a little bit about what how we're thinking about this whole cooperative structure, because I think that's, maybe that'll give you a sense of where this.
I'd love to learn about your cooperative structure. Thank you.
Okay. So, all right, just a little bit of background. I had a long career in computer graphics, and then, in the early part of this millennium, I decided I wanted to really focus on social software. I got tired of the computer graphics world, and, became kind of like factory work. And early on in like 2005, I kind of conceived what's now called an instance of what's now called liquid democracy. The idea of using networks of delegation to make collective decisions, where every participant doesn't have to vote in order to be represented. So if there's a decision about a topic that I don't have expertise in, I can delegate to people that I know that do have expertise in that, and they can delegate to other people who have the expertise in that domain, and thus, a small number of people who are knowledgeable can represent the entire whole. Depending on who wants, if people abstain or they're not ready to vote or just don't have the time. So that was called SMART. And, the basic idea was that these networks of delegation not only allow you to pass your voting rights to other people in, unlimited cascades, but also they develop what's the network centrality of a given person in that network is a measure of their authoritativeness. And so you can sort of combine that delegation and authoritativeness into new ways of doing collective decision making. And that was that's been kind of my hammer since 2005. I built a company around exploiting that to distill signal out of the noise of Twitter, where we would build these networks of who talks a lot about crypto and who retweets who in that collection of people, and then those retweets are kind of proxies for respect. Like if I retweet you a lot, that means that I respect your opinion a lot in general. It doesn't always, but it is, random retweets don't necessarily mean you respect someone, but if you retweet someone a lot, it indicates some level of respect. And then we would use those networks and our algorithm to essentially sort all the URLs that collection of people tweets into an auto-curated stream of URLs, where the ones that are most heavily influenced by the people with the most authoritative. So anyway, a couple of years ago, while I was still working for the company that bought my company, I told them I really, that I was, education is
As
great, but it's not.
sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting, Brad. Yeah, because it's super interesting. So your company, it was the one that was doing this social graph based on Twitter,
Yes.
like
So
Twitter
that company
reactions
was
and
called. Yeah, that was called Associative, and we were bought by Edcast. And Edcast didn't really use it. I mean, it continued to do the crawling that we did. We were doing essentially we were crawling thousands of Twitter lists, and we were sorting the content that came through that, and then using that to do create auto-curated feeds. And then when Edcast bought us, they applied that to providing public content. Like if you are trying to educate yourself in TensorFlow, right? We would be able to give you all the most relevant, up to date references on TensorFlow every day, based on that. So that was their application. So they took a fairly broad application of just kind of general auto curated feeds and just narrowed it down to just providing content to people who are trying to learn different things, and that was fine. But so that was Edcast, and they got bought last year by another company in the education technology space called Cornerstone. So that's all, and since then I've actually rewritten the Twitter crawling stuff, but it's not core to what we're doing. So it's something that it does fit into as part of our strategy, but it's not primary. And what is primary for me, and where the new now networked autonomous organisms concept comes out of, was 2 years ago. I was still working for EdCast, but I felt like I wasn't using my time. I felt like, the world really needs all of us to be, working as hard as we can to kind of, keep the planet from crashing, and that I wasn't really using my skills to the utmost as far as that goes. So, and the only thing that really kind of gave me and still gives me hope of rising above this, broken operating system we have running the planet is the idea of like superorganisms of people acting at kind of the virtual nation level of, if you think about all the great people that I know and and, even just a few degrees of separation would get us to millions of people who are actively, passionately working on, inventing a positive future. And yet we don't have any real collective agency, and the basic, the thing that kind of motivated the current work, which started back in June 2020, was the idea of facilitating the formation of networks of trust at scale, and then exploiting the innate capacity of networks like that to make collective decisions at, what I call extreme decision making, being able to make decisions at global scale in real time, and much more efficiently, better decisions, more trustworthy decisions, faster than any other way. And that's the core idea, is that if you think about the optimal way that, 1 million people could make a real-time decision, it would almost by definition have to involve, chains of digital delegation that are domain specific. And so that's kind of the core idea. Yeah, the core idea is just, being able to exploit global scale delegation to make decisions faster and better.
How do you turn that into code? Like, so many of the things you're saying resonate a lot with me, like what you said about creating collective agency, right? Like, our vision has always been we always thought, well, if we build a social app that is fun to use, and then we give people the ability to vote on stuff collectively, then effectively we've given people collective agency, right? This is our very sort of simplistic thinking. We're still not finished with building a social app that's fun to use. So unfortunately, it's so hard. What is your vision of getting because your idea sounds awesome, or the goals you want to achieve exactly where we want to get. How do you feel you will get there in terms of, concrete steps, concrete product? What are you building?
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just want to jump into that, and also just ask, how is it going so far, like practically, if you have any use cases, because as Florian mentioned, it also it speaks a lot to me, the vision of what you're doing.
It would be a lot easier to do that if we could screen share, but I can point you to, and give you some direction on exploring that. But let me just talk about that in terms of execution. Number one, when we started writing code, which was just over 2 years ago, it was in December of 2020, we fundamentally focused on a graph database, because I had been doing graph database work in my day job, and I really felt like if you're going to do networks of trust, you can do them with, SQLite or whatever, or relational databases, or even, no NoSQL databases, but graph databases are really, much more intuitive for doing anything that has to do with social graphs. So we just started with a ArangoDB and just started writing code around the idea. But the core idea is growing networks of trust by invitation. So when you talk about your community, if you have a community of 10 people that are about some subject, each of those 10 people knows other great people that are, should be part of that community in their mind. So they invite them. And so Flavia invites these people, and Florian invites these people, Brad invites these people, and now you're growing the network. and those invitations are edges in the graph, and those become, delegation edges by default if you want, and then you can refine those. So the initial code was about, getting people to a graph, and also we did some initial forays into a collective decision making demonstrations that show that you can, do collective coordination with these networks. So we have a lot of code that's been around that, and labeling people by domain of expertise. And again, I could do this much better but if you go to emerge.new.network, so emerge.noo.network, that's probably, I can point you to a couple of things. On the decision-making side, we've decided we haven't focused a lot on the user interface there because there's a lot of other people doing innovation there, and that's not really the key thing. I think that the best answer to your question about where we are is the core idea is that it's very easy for us to grow networks of people we trust, right? We know who they are, and the act of pointing to those people is very simple, right? And the core idea is we should do that with the purpose of, a high trust density networks that overlap and aggregate and federate into something large. And we should own and govern it together and create value, and then not worry about what the actual utility of it is, or don't let the lack of utility stop us from doing that. Does that make sense? So the idea is like, we can grow a graph like this and cooperatively own it without actually knowing what it's good for, or with knowing what it's good for, but without having to, develop the code. Like you guys have developed one of the initial apps that we kind of conceived was Slack for the rest of us, right? If you have a network, let's say you had a network, I'm kind of using the regenerative movement as my example of a virtual nation that exists but doesn't exist yet, right? So if you said, okay, let's grow a graph of people who are doing great work in the regenerative space, and we're going to start it from the three of us or the four of us, and we're all just going to say, well, these people are great, and then they'll say these people are great, right? And eventually you're going to span the entire regenerative movement, and some people maybe don't, will be less, appropriate for it. So you could span those, a million people in this space, and then, and that would be, imagine how valuable that would be. And if you had a cooperative structure that, incentivized high quality, growth of the network, you don't just invite anyone, you want to incentivize bringing great people in and not, random people. But then you collectivize that. I mean, a lot of what's going on in the DAO space about like Gitcoin of, doing grant proposals, and, I've been involved in a couple of recent ones of, communities with small endowments like $30,000 and, 20 proposals, and which ones get how much money, right? If you imagine doing that large scale, then you could say, okay, and then the entire million person community could say, what are the things that we really need? Well, we need Slack for the rest of us, or we need, open source attention, or we need, collective decision making. What are the tools that the VC funded world is not going to develop for us, and is not going to be open, and is not going to be decentralized, not going to be shared. But if we have this large graph that, obviously social graphs are worth a lot of money, and then you just have to you have to figure out ways of realizing that value that are consistent with the cooperative structure and not, based on perverse incentives like advertising. So anyway, that's the core idea of the now, is that we can form a large superorganism right now without having to know what exactly we're going to do with it.
I do have a question, but before that, I would like to just say how inspiring this is to me, because when I was initially thinking about Centropia, which back then I was calling alloptic because of the term allopticism from a paper, The Collective Intelligent Invisible Revolution from Jean-François Nobel. And he brings in these terms, allopticism, which is the ability in a group, that the ability to see each other's movement and coordinate around their movement. So he brings in, for instance, the example of basketball team, and how the collective intelligence is built in within the system based on their ability to see where the players are going, and then you decide and take action based on what you're seeing people doing and building. And after reading that, I was thinking, oh, it would be so powerful to have a map of regenerative projects and initiatives around me and people that are into the same things that I'm into. It would be so great to have this map so I could easily connect and collaborate with them. So it's super cool to know that you are working on that, and totally get the point that you mentioned before about creating the map, the social graph, and then understanding how to use it for governance, decision making, and so on. But I would like to know, are you doing something? Are you collecting this input? Are you building a network with it now? So how is it going kind of practically right now?
Yeah,
What are you mapping?
right. So one of the things that we've been doing is I call it kleptoparasitism. The idea of kleptoparasitism is it's a parasite that, steals from its prey, right? So there are birds that only eat things that they steal from other birds. And so we're kleptoparasiting LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera, for social networks of good people. And again, if you go to emerge.new network, there's one tab called inquiries. You have to choose a group. You have to log in. Anyway, why don't we do a screen share, a plan for a screen share? But anyway, we have a graph of 250,000 people that are 2 degrees of separation from me and Charles, basically. So I took 100 people I'm connected with on LinkedIn, and I said, okay, these are all great inventing the future people. Who are they connected to? And Charles did the same thing. We did the same for about 10 other people. In the case of the Emerge network, we started with Thomas Bjorkman, who was the founder, and he gave us a list of all of the 150 people that were coming to an event, and then we crawled them, and so in essence we built a social graph of about 250,000 people with like over 500,000 edges. That's all kind of. Go ahead.
Yeah, did you do it kind of manually? Did you point it out people, or did you use some of LinkedIn?
We have a bookmarklet code that automates it. So essentially, for you, Flavia, if you're connected to me, 1 degree if you're my first degree connection, then I can write. I have a button on my browser that says crawl Flavia's connection. So it goes to your page and then steps through your network. And if there's 50, or 100 pages of connections there, it adds each one. It goes to each page, takes the 10 people that are on that page, and creates nodes in our graph database for each of them, and an edge from you to them. Okay, so that part of it we've automated. We can do the same thing with Twitter, where we can just automate new additions to the graph based on if okay, Flavia retweeted this person, so we're going to add a new edge in there. So that part of it is really works well, and it's automated. Those people don't know they're there, and that's kind of where we're working on now. Is that what we want? And then the original intention was to have this be more intentional. That Flavia decides the key people that she wants to help form the virtual nation that she wants to be part of are, she points to them and they point to other people, and we all have a kind of an aspiration and an intention to create a network that's aligned around principles and values and goals. So, and to answer your question more explicitly about where we're at, so with the automated part of and again, you can explore this. If you go to the network tab on emerge.network or now.is, nao.is, if you just go to the network tab and you just start searching for names, you can find, a lot of people. You can find yourself, and it'll show you a three-dimensional network graph of those so like Flavia, if you find yourself in there, it'll show you the network of people we've scraped for you. And you can go to the list view and see it as a list. And then if you click on each name, you'll see who they're connected to, and you can kind of meander around there. So that part of it, it's for people discovery, like if you want to find people who have the word crypto in their LinkedIn self-description, that's all there. But in terms of the intentional growth of a network, we're focusing that around a more narrow approach, which also relates to this whole network cooperative idea,